Welcome back. We just talked about President Obama's trip in Baltimore to a mosque today with former Florida Governor Jeb Bush.
Yeah, the trip comes as American police chiefs are asking Congress for more help as they continue to adapt to new threats from homegrown terrorists. Earlier this week, before the Senate Homeland Security Committee, local police and safety officials urged lawmakers to provide more federal assistance to help protect their communities from terrorism. The need is especially great for smaller police departments like this one in Weston, Wisconsin. Also, New York City Police Commissioner Bill Bratton says his city has been the nexus or target, if you will, of more terror plots than any other city in America, including 4 plots in less than 2 years. The frontline response to terrorism in America is more pressing than any time since 9/11.
Joining us now for more on this, Ron Hosko, the former assistant director of the FBI and current president of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Ron, as always, it's great to have you with us.
Good to be with you.
All right, President Obama earlier thanked the Muslim community in Baltimore, but has he done enough to thank police departments around the country for all they've done to step up their fights against these new terror threats?
Certainly not. What the president has done with the police is raise expectations, raise the bar, criticize them at every opportunity, and try to hold them to a standard that is very, very difficult to meet.
So let me ask you, how much has this changed the way police and especially small departments conduct their business?
You know, I think there's been a number of developments in recent years, certainly since 9/11, that have changed our world. One of those phenomenon that police across America are racing to get ahead of is the active shooter phenomenon, whether that is terror-inspired, mental illness-driven, or some other cause. That takes training, that takes equipment, that takes time and effort so that the police can be there when those shots are fired and resolve it quickly. And that goes, slides over to the discussion about ISIS and the CT threat, the terror threat in America today. We have seen these incidents. We have seen the FBI involved in dozens of arrests in recent years that tell us that terror can strike anywhere in America. So it is those small town chiefs, just as much as it is Bill Bratton in New York, that have to find a way to be prepared. That takes infrastructure, that takes resources, it takes funding.
Oh, I want to focus on something that Senator Ron Johnson, who's actually from Wisconsin, here he is talking about how small the budgets can be for some of these police departments, especially when compared to these federal agencies that are trying to fight terror. Let's take a listen.
Department of Homeland Security has about $1.6 billion appropriated for grants. Department of Justice about $500 million. So it's about $2 billion that we allocate for grants to help folks like you. Sounds like a lot of money, but in a federal budget that's starting to approach almost $4,000 billion, about $3.7 trillion right now, that's about 0.05% of our federal budget.
When you expand things out and look at the percentage of how much we're spending on this, Ron, let's talk about how much money you think is actually appropriate to deal with these new threats. How much is actually needed?
Well, it's actually worse than the congressman suggests, because if you take a bigger view of what's going on in criminal justice reform today, particularly within the Department of Justice, they and the Congress recently took a huge pot of money that was intended to be shared back with state and local law enforcement that typically comes from drug enforcement. They are taking that huge pot of money off the table right now. I think over $1 billion with a B. You look at DOJ constricting this use of forfeiture proceedings to take the proceeds from criminal enterprises. That money, typically 80% of it, goes back into state and local law enforcement hands for that infrastructure that they desperately need. So there's another chunk that isn't part of his conversation, but should be part of the bigger conversation. When you talk about spreading that money across thousands of police departments, it gets awfully thin. We also have this. We also have President Obama recently, after the events last year in Ferguson or a year and a half ago in his president's commission, deciding to take certain military equipment that had been surplus property out of the hands of state and local law enforcement, including some of these armored vehicles that are used, and we saw them in San Bernardino, we saw them in Colorado Springs, to rescue and to get in the way of an active shooter.
Yeah,
That's
these new terror threats, including San Bernardino, have cropped up. You don't hear too many people talking about taking those assets away from police departments like they once did. Ron Hosko, thanks so much for being with us. Sorry to cut you short. As always, we're out of time. That's why we know we'll have you back to talk about these and other important issues in the near future.
Good to be with you.
Thank you.
He came in third place in Iowa, but some say he may come in first when it's all said and done. Coming up next during today's roundtable, we'll discuss the real reason why Marco Rubio's rivals may be beefing up their attacks and whether or not they'll make a difference. Russian President Vladimir Putin meets with former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. What the two discussed coming up in today's headlines.